Hey dreamers, welcome to Back Then with Ben, your cozy corner of nostalgia and bedtime calm. Tonight, let's drift back to a simpler time, where the air smelled of fresh rain, the night hummed softly with crickets, and the glow of streetlights turned sleepy suburbs into dreamscapes. So, settle in, breathe deeply, and let the gentle rhythm of memory guide you into rest. The summer air hung heavy over the quiet suburban street, a mix of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of rain still clinging to the rooftops. It was late, later than most families here ever stayed awake, but the neighborhood itself never felt completely asleep. The 1970s were a slower time, but not without their subtle hum of life, the kind that lingered long after porch lights went dim and screen doors clicked shut. Streetlights flickered with that old sodium orange glow, stretching long shadows across driveways and picket fences. The rain, which had drizzled all evening, now softened into delicate drops that tapped gently against car hoods and aluminum gutters. In the distance, crickets carried on their endless nighttime choir, their steady rhythm blending with the faint hiss of rainwater streaming into storm drains. The whole street seemed wrapped in a kind of suspended calm, the sort of atmosphere that made you think the world had slowed its breathing. Down at the corner, a single bicycle leaned against a wooden lamppost, forgotten by some kid who had rushed home when the rain first began to fall. Its chrome handlebars caught the light, reflecting it in quick, watery glimmers. The wet pavement beneath shimmered faintly, broken only by the rippling circles of water pooling around the storm drains. A thin curtain of mist rose where the warm asphalt met the cool night air, giving the street an almost dreamlike haze. Inside the homes, the rhythms of the 70s lived quietly. Behind one window, a television buzzed softly with static, its signal lost after the nightly broadcast had signed off. In another, a record player's turntable spun in silence, the arm left hovering at the end of an old Fleetwood Mac record. Families slept in shag-carpeted bedrooms, some with avocado green alarm clocks ticking faintly on bedside tables, others with box fans humming steadily against the humid night. And yet, even in this stillness, there was a kind of restless energy, a suggestion that not everything was quite as peaceful as it seemed. Every creak of a wooden porch step, every distant bark of a dog carried sharper in the quiet. The rain, though gentle, seemed to press in against the houses, as though urging those awake to listen more closely. At the edge of the neighborhood, where the streetlights grew fewer and the trees clustered thick, stood the old cul-de-sac. Few people went there at night. The kids in the neighborhood whispered that it was haunted, though adults just laughed it off as another ghost story to keep them from wandering too far. Still, the place had its own strange aura. Tonight, with the glow of the lamps barely touching its cracked pavement, the cul-de-sac looked like a hollow mouth swallowing the night. A single figure moved along the sidewalk, a teenager, jacket zipped up tight despite the heat. His footsteps splashed lightly in the puddles as he carried something under his arm, wrapped in brown paper. The kind of thing you might mistake for a package, but the way he clutched it suggested it was something more. He glanced over his shoulder every so often, though the street was empty. Only the steady hum of cicadas answered him. He paused beneath a streetlight, its buzzing bulb flickering overhead. For a moment, he tilted his head back, rain dripping onto his cheeks. and closed his eyes as if listening for something beyond the crickets. When he opened them, the look in his eyes wasn't of someone out for a casual walk. It was something sharper, heavier, as though the weight of the whole night pressed down on his shoulders. He pulled the package closer to his chest and kept moving toward the cul-de-sac. The quiet hum of suburbia was about to break, though no one tucked safely inside their homes could yet know it. The night, sleepy as it seemed, was only just beginning to unfold. The boy's sneakers made a dull slap against the wet sidewalk as he walked further into the neighborhood. The street behind him, with its rows of well-kept houses and neat lawns, seemed to retreat into silence. Ahead, the cul-de-sac waited like a dimly lit stage, ringed with tall trees that swayed gently in the damp night air. The package under his arm grew heavier with each step. The paper was darkened in spots from the rain, the edges beginning to peel back. He shifted it awkwardly against his chest, careful not to let it slip. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a box wrapped by hand, but up close, there was something deliberate about the folds, as if whoever had sealed it meant for it to stay shut. He stopped again at the edge of the cul-de-sac and looked around. Every house was dark, curtains drawn, doors locked. The only sound was the dripping of rain from the branches and the faint crackle of a bug meeting its end against a streetlight bulb. The cricket song faltered for a moment, as though nature itself held its breath, then resumed with renewed persistence. The boy exhaled slowly. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not this late. Not carrying something like this. But he had promised. The voice on the phone, scratchy and almost drowned by static, had told him where to go and what to bring. "You'll know when the time comes," it had said. He hadn't recognized the voice, though something about it had felt eerily familiar, like hearing an echo of a dream you couldn't fully recall. He stepped into the cul-de-sac. The pavement here was different from the rest of the street. It was cracked, weeds pushing up through the seams, and a faint ring of darker asphalt suggested it had once been patched long ago. In the center, rainwater pooled into a shallow circle, reflecting the distorted image of the lone streetlight above. The boy approached it carefully, his reflection rippling with each drop that fell. He crouched at the edge of the puddle, setting the package down gently. The paper was wetter now, clinging tightly to its shape. He hesitated, glancing again over his shoulder. No one was there. Still, he felt watched. The sensation crept up his neck, a prickling heat beneath the cool night drizzle. "Just leave it," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible above the crickets. But his hands lingered. He traced the outline of the object inside, his fingers brushing over hard edges beneath the soggy paper. A box. Yes, but small, heavy. It didn't rattle when moved. He thought of tearing it open right then, of ignoring the voice's instructions, of finding out what he was carrying through the rain at midnight. Then, as if in answer to his hesitation, the streetlight flickered. Once, twice. A long, drawn-out buzz filled the cul-de-sac as the bulb strained, casting shadows that shifted unnaturally across the trees. The boy froze, his hand still on the package. The air grew thicker, the sound of the crickets drowned by that buzzing hum. And then, silence. The light steadied again, glowing faintly orange. He swallowed hard and pulled his hand away. No, not yet. He couldn't open it here. Not like this. The voice had been clear. He was only the messenger. The boy stood quickly, water splashing from the puddle as his shoes stepped back. He left the package where it was, its brown paper already sagging against the dampness, and turned to go. His footsteps quickened, splashing harder against the asphalt as he headed back toward the safety of the lit street. But the cul-de-sac did not stay silent. As he passed the edge of the circle, a faint sound echoed behind him. Not rain, not crickets, not the hum of electricity. It was the slow, deliberate tearing of paper. The boy froze, his breath caught in his chest. He didn't look back. He didn't want to. The package had been sealed too carefully, too tightly. It shouldn't be opening on its own. And yet, the sound continued. Rip, rip, sharp against the night. He ran. The boy didn't stop running until he reached the corner where the streetlight buzzed faintly over the forgotten bicycle. His chest heaved, breath clouding in the damp air. But even as he leaned against the lamppost to steady himself, he refused to look back. The cul-de-sac still weighed on him like a shadow at his back, an unseen presence that might follow if he dared to turn. His mind replayed the sound, paper tearing, slow and deliberate. It was impossible. He told himself the package couldn't open on its own. Someone had been there. Someone must have stepped out of the trees the moment he left it behind. That was easier to believe than the alternative. The street stretched quiet and empty before him, rain dripping from the eaves of houses, the faint glow of television still visible behind a few curtains. This was normal, familiar, safe. He told himself that if he just walked home, went straight to his room, and forgot what he'd heard, the night would fade into memory like a dream. But as he started forward again, he noticed something strange. The crickets had stopped, not all at once, but in a wave that rolled outward, as if the silence was spreading house by house. Their absence left the night hollow. He could hear the rain too clearly, each drop hitting pavement with an unnatural sharpness, each gutter echoing like an empty chamber. The boy's skin prickled as the quiet deepened around him. He glanced to his right. The house, there was one he knew well, Mrs. Callahan's, the widow with the big hydrangea bushes and a collection of wind chimes that usually sang in the evening breeze. Tonight, the chimes were still, the air heavy and unmoving. A single lamp glowed in her front window, though the rest of the house was dark. The boy hesitated, then stepped closer. Through the thin lace curtain, he could see her living room. The lamp sat on an end table, casting a warm glow across shag carpet and wood-paneled walls. A stack of magazines lay neatly on the coffee table, beside a pair of reading glasses. But Mrs. Callahan wasn't there. No shadow moved across the room. No figure sat in her recliner. The house was too still, too staged, as though she had stepped out only moments ago and never returned. A faint creak broke the silence. The boy froze, peering harder through the glass. The sound hadn't come from inside the house. It came from behind him. He turned slowly. At the far end of the street, barely visible beneath the hazy glow of another street lamp, something stood. A shape, not quite tall enough to be an adult, not small enough to be a child. It was hunched, shoulders curved forward, as though the weight of its body pulled against the air itself. The boy's heart hammered. The package. He didn't wait to see more. He bolted down the street, sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. The figure didn't move, not yet, but the silence of the crickets followed him, stretching farther, swallowing block after block until even the sound of his own breath seemed muffled. When he reached his own house, a split level with faded yellow siding and a basketball hoop over the garage, he nearly tripped on the steps in his hurry. He fumbled for the screen door, the metal handle slick under his palm, and shoved his way inside. The familiar smell of his home, coffee lingering in the kitchen, the faint must of books and carpet, wrapped around him like a blanket. His father's boots sat by the door. A coat hung neatly on the rack. Everything was as it should be. And yet, as he locked the door behind him, he couldn't shake the certainty that the night hadn't stayed outside. The house, too, seemed to be holding its breath. The boy pressed his back against the locked door, the cool wood steadying him as he tried to catch his breath. His heartbeat pounded so loudly it seemed to fill the hallway. He stood still for a long moment, listening. Nothing moved. The house was quiet, but not in the usual way. It was too quiet, as though all the familiar nighttime sounds had been drawn out of it. The refrigerator's hum, the clock in the kitchen, even the occasional groan of settling wood. Gone. He swallowed hard and stepped deeper inside. The living room stretched before him, a snapshot of the 70s in every detail. The shag carpet squished under his damp sneakers, mustard yellow against the paneled walls. A macrame plant holder swayed slightly, though no breeze moved through the house. On the television console, the screen was black, reflecting his pale face back at him. A few vinyl records were stacked carelessly near the stereo. Eagles, Boston, Fleetwood Mac, all reminders of how ordinary this house should feel. And yet, it didn't. The boy's eyes drifted to the window. Rain slid in thin trails down the glass, streetlight glow bending through it. He stepped closer and peeked out through the curtains. The street looked empty now, deserted, the wet asphalt stretching on without movement. The figure he'd seen earlier was gone. That should have been a relief, but instead it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He shut the curtain quickly and turned toward the hallway. Upstairs, his father was asleep. He could hear faint snores through the ceiling vent, steady and rhythmic. That, at least, was normal. Safe. He didn't want to wake him. What would he even say? That he'd left a strange package in the cul-de-sac, and something had followed him home? No, his father wouldn't believe him. No adult ever did. He crept down the hall instead, toward the kitchen. The linoleum floor was cold beneath his feet as he stepped inside. A single bulb above the sink glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the counters. The boy pulled open a cupboard, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water at the tap. The sound of running water was a comfort, breaking the unnatural silence for a moment. He lifted the glass to his lips, drinking greedily. But then, halfway through, he froze. A sound echoed faintly behind him. Rip. He lowered the glass slowly, his hand trembling. That sound, the same one from the cul-de-sac. The slow tearing of paper. It wasn't outside anymore. It was in the house. The boy turned his head toward the living room. The shadows seemed longer now, reaching farther across the carpet than they should have. He stepped softly, glass still in hand, and peered around the doorway. Nothing. But the sound came again. Rip, peel, a soft crackle. It was closer this time, clearer, as though the package itself had been carried into the house and left waiting for him to discover. His stomach tightened. He had left it in the cul-de-sac. He was sure of it. And yet, something in him whispered otherwise. What if it had never stayed there? He forced himself forward, inching toward the stairs. His bedroom was at the end of the hall upstairs, a space he thought of as safe. He told himself that if he could just get under the covers, pull the sheets over his head, and shut his eyes, this night would dissolve into the kind of half-remembered dream that faded with morning. But as he reached the bottom step, he noticed something that stopped him cold. A damp trail of water. It stretched up the stairs in a thin line, each step glistening faintly under the dim light. Drops of rainwater led upward, disappearing into the darkness of the second floor. And from above, faint but undeniable, came the sound again. Rip. The boy tightened his grip on the glass, knuckles white. Whatever he had left behind wasn't gone. It was here, and it had gone upstairs. The boy stood frozen at the base of the staircase, staring at the thin trail of rainwater glistening under the dim light. Each droplet shimmered like a breadcrumb leading upward, daring him to follow. His throat tightened as he swallowed hard, the glass in his hand now useless, trembling slightly in his grip. Upstairs, the house was quiet, too quiet, but every so often, he swore he heard it again. Rip, not loud, but steady, not frantic, but deliberate. The kind of sound that made the silence worse because it insisted on existing within it. His first instinct was to call out for his father, to shout and let someone else shoulder the weight of whatever this was. But he knew the answer he'd get. His father would groan, rub his eyes, and mutter something about bad dreams or imagination. And if the package was real, if something truly had followed him home, then he didn't want his father walking blindly into it. So, slowly, carefully, the boy began to climb the stairs. The steps creaked under his weight, each groan of the old wood echoing louder than it should have. He kept his eyes on the damp trail, the drops growing smaller, more spaced out the higher he went. The air upstairs felt heavier, cooler, as if the rain from outside had seeped into the walls themselves. At the top, the hallway stretched long and dim. Faded wallpaper with orange and brown floral patterns curled slightly at the seams. Family photos lined the wall, his parents smiling in front of the car, a younger version of himself holding up a baseball glove. But the faces in the frame seemed muted now, as though the light had drained them of warmth. The trail of water curved toward his bedroom door. He stopped in the hall, listening. His father's snores were still audible from the master bedroom. Steady, unbroken, safe. But just beyond that, from behind his own door came the unmistakable sound. Rip, peel, crackle. It was coming from his room. The boy tightened his grip on the glass and stepped closer. His door was closed, though he couldn't remember shutting it when he left earlier. A faint line of light glowed beneath the bottom edge, but it wasn't the warm yellow of his lamp. It was something paler, colder, like moonlight refracted through water. He hesitated, heart racing, then placed his hand on the doorknob. The metal was damp, slick with moisture. For a moment, he thought about turning back. He could retreat to his father's room, shake him awake, and refuse to explain until the man followed him here. But something inside him, curiosity, fear, or perhaps that same strange compulsion that had driven him to carry the package into the night, wouldn't let him. He twisted the knob. The door creaked open slowly. His bedroom was dark except for the faint, shifting glow that seemed to hover near the center of the room. It wasn't coming from a lamp or the streetlight outside his window. It pulsed faintly, as though it belonged to something alive. On the shag carpet near his desk sat the package, or what was left of it. The brown paper lay torn in strips across the floor, soggy and curling at the edges. The string that had bound it was snapped clean in two. What remained was a small, square wooden box, its surface slick with rainwater. Carvings etched its sides, shapes that looked almost like letters, though none he recognized. The glow seeped from the cracks where the lid met the base, pale and rhythmic, like the slow breathing of some hidden creature. The boy's hand trembled. The sound was clearer now, no longer just tearing but shifting, as though something inside was pressing upward against the lid, testing it, straining against its confinement. Rip, crack, groan. He stepped back instinctively, bumping into his dresser. A stack of baseball cards slid off, scattering across the floor. The noise made him wince, but the box didn't stop. The glow pulsed faster, brighter, responding almost like it had heard him. The boy gripped the glass tighter, the cool weight of it grounding him in a way nothing else could. And then, from inside the box, came a sound that was not paper, not wood. It was breathing. The boy's fingers clenched the glass so hard it felt like it might shatter in his grip. His room, the one place that had always been his refuge, no longer felt like his own. The box sat at the center of it, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The sound of breathing from within was steady, slow, too measured to be human. He took a step backward. The floorboard beneath him creaked. The glow surged in response. The boy froze. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his ears straining against the silence that pressed in from every corner of the house. He wanted to scream, to call for his father, but the sound stuck in his throat. A strange thought crept into his mind, chilling him even more than the glow. If Dad comes in here, it'll see him too. The box shifted. Not much, just a subtle scrape against the carpet, but enough to send a ripple of dread through the boy's body. He watched as the lid lifted, barely half an inch, a sliver of shadow forming between the wood. From that crack, the glow brightened, spilling pale light across his posters, his dresser, the carpet littered with baseball cards. And then came the sound. A whisper. Not words. Not at first. Just the suggestion of a voice. Dry. Faint. Like wind moving through a hollow pipe. But it carried a rhythm. A cadence. As though something inside was trying to form language it didn't quite remember. The boy strained to listen, heart hammering against his ribs. Home. He staggered back, his shoulders colliding with the dresser again. The box stilled. The glow dimmed, then pulsed faintly, like a living thing waiting for a response. Home. The whisper repeated, clearer this time. The boy shook his head violently. No, he muttered under his breath, though his voice cracked. thin and shaky. He didn't know what it was, didn't want to know, but he understood instinctively that acknowledging it, answering it, was dangerous. The lid shifted again, lifting another inch. The glow flared, washing over the room in pale light. From within, something scraped against the wood, long, deliberate, the sound of nails or claws. The boy stumbled backward toward the door, his hand fumbling for the knob. His pulse raced, sweat mixing with the dampness still clinging to his skin from outside. He had to get out, now. But as his hand touched the knob, another sound joined the whisper. A knock. 3 sharp raps against the inside of the box. Knock, knock, knock. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat. The knocking was too precise, too intentional. Whatever was inside wasn't trapped by accident. It wanted out. His hand tightened on the doorknob, twisting it frantically. But before he could open the door, the whisper came again, louder this time, layered with something deeper, something almost familiar. Let me home. The boy squeezed his eyes shut. He yanked the door open, the hinges squealing in protest, and bolted into the hallway. His father's snores carried faintly from the master bedroom, oblivious, while the glow from his own room bled out through the open doorway, spilling across the floral wallpaper. He didn't stop to look back. He ran, down the stairs, across the living room, into the kitchen, anywhere to put distance between himself and that thing. His glass slipped from his hand somewhere along the way, shattering against the linoleum with a sharp crack. He didn't even notice. Only when he reached the back door did he pause, fumbling with the lock. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the roof, the gutters overflowing with steady streams. He yanked the door open and stepped into the night air, desperate for escape. But as the rain hit his skin, soaking his hair and clothes, he froze again. The crickets hadn't returned. The street was silent, except for one sound, faint but impossible to mistake. Knock, knock, knock. Not from upstairs, not from behind him, from everywhere. Only when he reached the back door did he pause, fumbling with the lock. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the roof, the gutters overflowing with steady streams. He yanked the door open and stepped into the night air, desperate for escape. Thank you for dreaming with me tonight. If this peaceful journey brought you calm, please pass it on to someone who needs a little nostalgia and rest. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next trip back then. Until next time, dream well, dream deep, and good night.